Hi, my name's Glenn Ford, and I'm here today with Mike Hutchinson. We're both games designers and games developers that work together on various projects. So we're having a chat today about a new game that's coming out from Osprey Games in February of 2021. Should be, fingers crossed at this point. And that game is A Billion Suns. And that's a game that Mike is the lead designer on. I was developer for. And so I guess the first question to ask is, Mike, what is A Billion Suns?
Thanks, Glenn. A Billion Suns is a science fiction tabletop miniatures war game. So it's a spaceship combat game where you can use any miniatures you like, and you can battle out crazy science fiction fleet engagements between big loads of battleships and frigates and fighters and so forth. So it's going to be released as one of those little blue books, like you might see here from Osprey. So everything you need to play is in the little 65-page rulebook. And yeah, I'm really excited about it because it's got loads of wacky ideas in that almost didn't work and maybe still don't.
Yes, yeah. So A Billion Suns has a lot of, let's say, high concept games design stuff going on. So I always generally sort of talk generally about the idea of the game. I'm gonna ask a few questions about some of the bits and pieces because I think they might need a little bit of looking into. So I know something that was there from fairly early on, and we went through a few iterations on it, was the command system in A Billion Suns. Can you talk a little bit about possibly the viewpoint there in A Billion Suns and a little bit about how the command system heads up works in it? Because I think those are a couple of odd ideas to start with.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of like central images that sort of powered the game's design for me as I was trying to focus on it. But one of the feelings that I really wanted was that feeling of standing on the bridge of some massive capital ship and not just commanding the ship that you're stood on, but the entire fleet action that is happening in three-dimensional space around you, and indeed beyond, because there are other things that you've got in reserve that might be jumping in and tricks that you've yet to pull on your opponent. So that zoomed out viewpoint, which I think is quite common for like big sort of naval battles, that was like the beginning of it. But then I wanted to see if you could step out another sort of order of magnitude. And I suppose in that regard, I was quite inspired by Ender's Game and the idea that you might be a long way away from the activities, but you still might be able to be taking command and taking an interest. So that was the sort of feeling that I wanted to create. And then initially the command system was really just kind of a mashup of two things that I think quite highly of. One is the battle board system from Saga, which I think is a really interesting and delightful moment of kind of tactical options and organization at the beginning of a turn in Saga. And the other one was the Silver Tower, the Warhammer Quest Silver Tower game, which had a really interesting mechanic where similarly you threw some dice and then you sort of got them as resources to power your activities during the turn. So those two were kind of the inspiration. And it went through a number of iterations, and most of the game's development life cycle, they were dice, and you rolled them, and then you could do things with them, and you could position them on certain spots and move them around. And then a few things happened, I suppose. One is, as with any good idea, when it hits sufficient playtesting, you find out whether there are some horrible edges. And there was certainly a couple of horrible edges where it's never nice when you have playtesters who realize that they have like lost control for reasons outside of their like direct influence. And in the original command dice system, where the ability to bring ships in or power them up was very dependent on whether you rolled the right dice. Quite often you'd roll the dice and they were just a bunch of rubbish, and you were like, oh, I had a really good plan, but I'm not allowed to execute it. The game is telling me that I'm not allowed to execute it. And there was a sort of intention that was a little bit of AI, where the troops aren't doing exactly what you want them to do. And then I remembered that I hate every game that is like that, and I don't want to make one that's like that. So so we swapped them out for tokens, and now you have a battle board that you get a number of tokens at the start of each turn, and then you get to push those tokens into little areas. And it's not fundamentally critical to your game plan where you push them, apart from there's this section called jump in, which we'll no doubt talk a little bit more about. But they are a kind of resource that you spread out as a way of either influencing the fact that you can grab the initiative or not, whether or not you're going to bring in some reinforcements, and then a sort of catch-all blob of things which you activate, which you use during the tactical phase to power up your shields or power up your weapons or turn your inertial dampers to max.
Yes, give yourself a little bit of edge when you really need to do something or sort of make something happen. So you talked a little bit passingly there about jumping ships in during A Billion Suns. So there's a couple of things about jumping in that we'll sort of maybe want to talk about in two parts. The first one, and it's one of the big, I think, ideas for A Billion Suns, is that there are no set army lists in A Billion Suns. There is no preset fleet. There's jumping. You are of a corporation that has some form of infinite resources. You can have whatever you want if you're willing to sort of pay for it and jump it into the battlefield. So, can you talk a bit about the decision to write a game that had no preset lists before you turned up to the table, and a bit about the process of maybe the profit and loss conditions for A Billion Suns, because I think those are two pretty big and weird ideas.
It's interesting. You might potentially remember this better than me. So, like, one of the other like really strong image that sort of the rest of the game gels itself around is there's a moment in. I'm going to naff up my nerd cred because it's a while since I've watched them. But there's a moment in one of the Disney Star Wars movies, it might be Rogue One, where a ship suddenly appears from a big Imperial ship suddenly appears from nowhere and like careens through a bunch of rebel ships and destroys them. And they were like pootling around, going to do their combat-y thing, and then this massive thing just appeared out of nowhere, right on top of them, boom. And I was like, I don't really know how, but this has to be a thing that happens in the game. And indeed, there was at one point a collision system. I don't think there's a collision system anymore, he says, checking his context page. But
there's jump shocking, but
oh yeah, no, I think that's it.
Yeah, there's jump shock.
That'll do the job.
That's that rather than actual tonking into each other.
So the idea that ships appear anywhere all of the time in the middle of the proceedings was certainly in there right from very early on, and that suggested really early on that the game happens in a space without deployment zones. You put jump points down and then stuff starts appearing. And interestingly, initial versions of the game, there was measurements between the deployment points and they had to be in special, triangles and so on. And Rufus, one of the playtesters, just kept asking, like, why do I have to measure these things? Why can't I just put them wherever I like? And that's always a fantastic question, because the answer is quite often, oh, if you take that rule out, nothing happens, nothing bad happens, and actually some interesting decisions go in the player's hands. And then at that point in the game, there were fleet lists and there were points for ships, and you constructed a fleet before you turned up to the table, and then you kind of introduced it at the right moments and things would appear, and you could appear them on later turns. And then we sort of realized, well, if you buy a big battleship and you turn it up later in the game because it's a a cleverer move to do that, but you only get like 1 or 2 turns out of it. Like maybe you should get a discount. And what if things get destroyed? Like, should they give you money back? And so these thoughts started to develop into the idea that maybe this is a game where you don't know what you're planning to bring to the field, and you bring something, and then Glenn puts something down, and then I put something down, and then we just kind of allow the situation to escalate. And that was really, really tied in with this other kind of high concept idea that I had, which is I really wanted the points that you buy ships with to be the same as victory points. I wanted there to be one currency of victory points and points, which like is sort of not that revolutionary, because if you've played big mass battle games like the original Fantasy Battle and stuff, like you tend to top things up by counting the amount of victory points that you've killed. But by turning it round and saying, well, maybe you can only spend the things that you're going to make, is kind of where the big switcheroo came. And so you start with no victory points. And in Warhammer, you start with no victory points, but you've given 2,000 victory points to the opposing general, and you have to claw them off them. And in this one, you start with no victory points, and you have to go into debt in order to bring some ships in, and then you have to blow things up or complete missions in order to get back into the black. And I think that mechanism there is probably where the background came from, where I was like, well, I kind of want a sort of extension of the corporate universe that sort of grows out of Gaslands, and we've got this profit and loss tracker. So it just felt like, oh, okay, maybe you're not an admiral, maybe you're a CEO. And then everything just started locking together at that point.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, one of the things I really enjoy about that is that because whenever you jump in a ship and you pay for the ship and you go into debt, the way that one player chooses to escalate the game defines what the options are for the other player. You don't have like X many points to spend, so you may as well spend them all. What the hell? In this case, you turn up and I do thing X, and that means, okay, well, now you've got a certain budget. You can undercut me, you can overspend me, you can come in at the same level. And it means that the two players end up defining the size of the game. And and I think it's something that's worked out quite elegantly in that respect.
Although this exact point, I think, is potentially, if not explicitly, this is potentially the implicit reason why more games don't have this system. Because although, as you've described, that's quite a lovely thing where like the shape of the game is emergent from the decisions the two players make in the early turns. It's also been noted both in our playtesting and by the wider community that there is an element where if somebody deliberately plays in a particularly heavy in one direction or heavy in another kind of a way, then you can end up with a slightly non-gamey experience where somebody just kind of throws the game in one direction and they kind of throw the game away, but you still have to play the game. And it's weird because all war games are like that. Like if you play in a bizarre way and you don't even care about winning, then of course you can ruin any tabletop miniatures game. That's just your lookout. It's just that because Billion Suns has got quite unique mechanics, I think it's almost like people haven't figured out what the new social contract for a game like this is. And it would be interesting to see people wrestle with that.
Yeah, I think because you end up defining all shapes of a given game of A Billion Suns. I think it's something we've spoken about, before, is that with A Billion Suns, you're allowed any ship in the game at any point, and there are some people that are going to be very excited by that freedom, and there are some people that are going to be a little bit overawed by it. But again, I really think it's one of the things I love about it, because there's no way that you can lose before you turned up to the table. I love games
there's no armchair list building where you've outbuilt my list, therefore there isn't a game here.
Yeah, because there are some games where you turn up, you look at the two lists, and you realize, well, okay, what is going to happen on the tabletop is essentially a formality. In A Billion Suns, it's always about what's going to happen on the tabletop, and it's always going to be what happens from turn to turn.
It's interesting because that complaint about just to draw a comparison back to one of our previous videos, that complaint about you turn up to the table and it's really like it's just going through the motions because like the build phase, the list planning phase already won. That's sort of a thing in Magic the Gathering and kind of building games like that, and then you get an answer to that, which is like a deck building game where you all kind of you have a buffet in front of you, and it's just like, can you select from that buffet in a better order and at the right moments? And actually, in some respects, hadn't really occurred to me in this way, but there's a sort of deck building flavor to the way that you make decisions turn by turn, particularly in this jump step, where at the beginning of every turn, and there tend to be only 3 turns in A Billion Suns. At the beginning of every turn, you get a chance to spend the command tokens off your helm, and then for every command token you spend, you get to deploy a blob of ships up to 5 of a single type. And so you get maybe, depending on the size of the game, you might get sort of 2 to 10 decisions on bringing in battle groups, which in this case is a bit like kind of picking cards out of the marketplace on a deck builder.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like one of the things that has come with the sort of the age of tournament net listing is that there are some sort of competitive games where, because people can now go online and look up the list for their army, and even look up how to play that list for that army. A lot of competitive tournaments aren't testing the person who's across the table from you. They're testing who's done the research at the right time and in the right place. And I don't think it was a conscious thing, but there is a thing where I think ABS has turned out to be a sort of reaction against that, or a thing that is a bit of an antithesis to that, where it's like, okay, it's always going to be about you and the other person. There is never going to be a way that the other person can go, oh, it's so I looked up this army list and I looked up from the winner of a tournament in another country how to play this army list, and I will go by their list of instructions, and you're essentially playing that other person. It's just I'm going to proxy for them today in this regional tournament that we're at, where there's so I'm essentially playing the world champion at Magic the Gathering because you've got his deck list and his sort of set of instructions.
Although having said that, actually, I think the crispness of some elements of ABS might make it a reasonable tournament game, at least played one-on-one, because it's quite even-handed and because it's quite tactical. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, personally, I would argue that it makes it a better tournament game because it's
about the game. It's not about the pre-plan.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. I think some of those games.
It's like chess in that regards.
yeah. A Billion Suns is just like chess.
Teleporting.
One of the reasons that I would love to see A Billion Suns get a tournament scene, and it's something that I said long ago and was a joke when it was sort of originally mentioned, and has turned into one of the coolest features, I think, of A Billion Suns, is the multiple table format of A Billion Suns. And I still want to see, I would love to see a tournament where you're just any designated A Billion Suns playing surface and is an acceptable playing surface. So do you want to explain the multiple table format?
I very much do. I'm pretty sure you suggested this.
Yeah.
And
I think in passing, at first, but
yeah, and it seemed too good to be true. So here's the thing: like science fiction combat in movies is all about things arriving in unexpected places, and often it's about star wiping between one place to another and there being multiple things going on, or it's about you being chased through multiple jumps in a thing. And The other thing, and so with all these jump points going on, I already mentioned that we sort of came out with a situation where it didn't really matter where the jump points were, and there weren't any deployment zones. And once there aren't any deployment zones, you don't need any table edges because you don't need a certain size of table. And I think I'm weirdly obsessed with not having specific sizes of tables because I find that really pleasing as a way of opening up miniature gaming to people who don't necessarily have 6x4 tables in their garage. And once you've got jump points and you've got tables that don't need to be any size, and Glenn suggests, what if there are more than one table because teleporting spaceships? Then you can just point at a flat surface anywhere that's nearby, or get some masking tape and like split your table into 3 or 4. And these can be independent play areas that are completely interlinked because you've got jump points, and once you've got jump points, you can hop between the jump points. And my goodness, we played it a couple of times early doors, and it was just like, this game is instantly better with this in. Like, how does this even work? But it totally works. And it's going to be a real doozy because it sounds mad when you say it to people, and then they say, oh, but I don't have the space and blah, blah, blah. And it's easy because you just take the normal situation that you're already playing and you put a piece of tape down the middle, and now you've got 2 tables and another piece of tape, and you've got, but the tables aren't too small. Like, what's the recommended size for each one? And it really doesn't matter. Like, it's difficult for people to get their heads around, but it really doesn't matter what size the tables are, because the closer you cram objectives in and jump points, just the more messy the melee gets. And it's like having a big punch up, and the more spread out and space you've got, then it's more like having a shooting range match. And it doesn't matter, like, the game doesn't care and works great in either situation, or in both, because you can have one tiny stool that you're playing on and one massive 6x4 table, and those two things are entirely compatible. I don't know, like, it's incredibly surprising and delightful that it worked as well as it did, and it became so awesome, and it improved the game so much that what felt like it was going to be something that was a cool idea that you could put in, just like, I just wrote it in as mandated, because honestly it's so fun with the multiple tables, and it's so easy once you've got your head around how to set it up. But now when you roll up scenarios, contracts, which are essentially the objectives for each game, you roll up 3 contracts, and each one of them will potentially tell you, add another table, and you have read the rules, so you've got to add another table. That's just what we're doing here. Follow them rules, people. Add multiple tables to A Billion Suns, and then jump between them.
Yeah, because the play space. So in A Billion Suns, you put down a jump gate, and that's where your ships come in when you jump them from hyperspace, from wherever the list is sitting. So there was an early point of going, okay, well, if my ships are jumping on this jump gate and I can put this jump gate down anywhere, why can't I put this jump gate instead of on the table we're sat next to on this over here? I mean, the jump gate isn't driving from one spot to another. It's not walking. I'm pulling it out of space ether. So why are we tied to it? And it's like you say, if anything, it makes it easier to find the space for, because you don't need to get together a single 6 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot by 4 foot flat surface. You need 2 or 3 flat surfaces of any. And we've played with one of the galaxies being on a high chair, or on a breakfast bar, and a shelf, on a computer desk. It means that as long as you have 3 flat surfaces within arm's reach, then you've got enough space to play A Billion Suns.
And excitingly, what this means is that you can get 2 or 3 transparent plastic tables like you used to get in the 70s in your grandma's house. You put them on top of each other, and you can play that game of 3-dimensional chess that you always wanted to play, and the game will support that out of the box.
Well, I think one of the things is it's just like chess. I think when you came up with Gaslands, it's that thing of, okay, you've got those toy cars from your childhood that you always wish there was a solid set of rules to play with. Here's a solid set of rules for it. And for me, there is a bit of that thing of A Billion Suns, where as a child you were like, okay, the coffee table is Alpha Centauri, and the sofa is the solar system, and the shelf over there is Beetlejuice. And A Billion Suns can let you do that. You can go, okay, that surface is that galaxy, and that surface is that galaxy. and that galaxy's got a star in it that needs mining, and that one's got a planet in it, and now let's jump from one to another. And it's I you know, it's, I would say this because obviously we put together and you put in the things that you think are cool into a game, but jumping from one table to another table and having the moment of doing the thing the other person didn't spot because it's this sort of three-dimensional thing, and someone going, oh yeah, you get those moments where someone gets to go, oh yeah, no, that's brilliant, of course that's what you're doing, that it's so perfect. Now yeah, I didn't wrap my head around the fact that there was that on that table, that on that table, and that on that table, and you managed to jump from there to there and there to there and sort that. So it has great moments for it.
Although that does make me think we should address one of the elephants in A Billion Suns, which is this is going to be, you know, potentially one of its downfalls, is A Billion Suns is not Gaslands. It's a very, very different game, and so yeah. Gaslands, like the visual image of that was very much like, you know, Hollywood physics, cars smashing into each other and spinning around, burning donuts with flamethrowers out of the front of them, and everything serves that madcap explodey thing. Whereas the zoomed out, like almost the pieces on the board are like little blips on a heads-up display, and you're like some kind of savant kind of ice cold admiral calculating the lives of, you know, thousands of sailors in multiple battle groups of interstellar vessels. Like, it's got a much colder, standoffish, like strategic vibe to it, and that kind of cooks its way through a lot of the mechanisms and mechanics. So it's a much more thinky game, and the moments at the beginning of each turn where you're trying to imagine what you're going to put on the table and what your opponent's going to respond with, and the game supports multiple players, so it's 2 to 4 players. So it's similar to Gaslands in that it sort of allows you to bring a group of players to the table, and that just creates a lot of like tactical thinking and planning and trying to predict these mad jumps that that Glenn, you're describing, where you might get you know, you might get ambushed from any side. And so it definitely has a slightly different pace to it and a different feeling to it. But I hope what I hope is that people who come to the game will, who are wanting a very evocative science fiction game, will find that it is evoking that extremely nicely. And it isn't space truckers ramming into each other. Gaslands does that already. This is doing something completely completely different, and I think completely unique.
Yeah, and I definitely think it's still telling a sort of a different sort of story, but it's telling a story in I think still a very evocative way. Because I mean, I love those moments when you know, that there's a set of refugees going through a shipping channel, and you're sort of weaving through them with recon ships, and you know that there's a blockade of destroyers, and you can do all that with A Billion Suns. It tells stories on, I think, a bigger canvas than Gaslands, but I don't think they're any less stories. I mean, that's certainly my take on it. I mean, I think one of the early ways you can see the difference there is that Gaslands is very centered on its movement system. It's a very, very non-abstract movement system. But one of the early decisions that you made with A Billion Suns is that the movement system in A Billion Suns is extremely abstracted. It's sort of unusually abstracted. So the ships are all down to a center pinpoint for their sort of their purpose on the tabletop. I mean, was it a conscious decision to make A Billion Suns more abstracted on the tabletop, less based on the size of a miniature or sort of the length of a ship?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And there's a few reasons for that. One is I wanted it to be miniatures agnostic and scale agnostic, and that suggests that you pick a point and you measure from, and that picking a point and measuring from the flight stand is that's pretty classic sort of spaceship gaming stuff anyway. That happens in Battlefleet Gothic and other places as well. But the critical thing is, like, what does this game care about? And the thing that this game cares about very much is, where are ships and in what direction are they pointing? And one of the things that this game doesn't care about is how fast are these ships moving, how fast have they moved, in what direction did they move. And like there are some games like so for example what's it called, Full Thrust, that game asks the question, what if you tried to model momentum correctly in space, and that like the direction of ships and their momentum is independent, and you get a kind of what's that game, Asteroids, when you're shooting the asteroids with the ship that can spin around whilst it's moving. And that is very fun, and it's kind of Battlestar Galactica plays with those ideas in on the screen as well. But that was too zoomed in, like that's too much about the mechanics of an individual ship. And remember, this game's about stepping back, and it's like, okay, where on this tactical heads-up display am I exerting strategic pressure? Where are you exerting strategic pressure? You see how like chess it is, Glenn? And then
a few more dice than chess, just a few.
A lot of dice in it.
One of the things
that got one of the things that was there right from the very beginning, which I nicked from Hobgoblin, was this idea that weapons have minimum and maximum ranges, so they create this donut around themselves. So that's one of the two ways that sort of ship classes express themselves. So big lumbering ships, they've got these massive guns on them, but you can't shoot anything close to you because the whole thing is, you know, a lumbering thing. And so they've got minimum ranges, and so if you're within 8 inches, for example, then you can't get the big guns on you, and that means the little guys can sneak in, and they've got their short range guns, but they are better at sneaking under. And the other thing is that having decided that there were things called primary weapons and things called auxiliary weapons, simply because I wanted to give ships to weapon systems and they seemed fun, the idea that auxiliary systems were like always on, sort of snap fire, you know, pinching from infinity and everything, you know, that has used that kind of auto snap fire, interrupt fire thing. So now you've got auxiliary weapons, which are like a 45-degree arc thing pointing out the front of the ship, and they're always on. So if you move in front of my ship and I've got my auxiliary weapons at 180.
Yeah, you've got the other way around of auxiliary and primaries.
So if you fly and park in front of one of my ships and it's got auxiliary weapons in range, then they can blast away as a sort of snap fire reaction. And so now you've got, where are all these ships, and where are they pointing, and where is their like sort of wedge of cheese auxiliary fire, and now you can create overlapping board control and pressure from these auxiliary fire arcs and stuff. And so for that reason, like, it does not matter about the individual momentum of ships and all that kind of stuff. It's like at the end of a very, very brisk movement step, where is this ship and in what direction is it facing? And honestly, my visual image for that is like, you know, if this game could be played with wooden counters with those big long sticks that like World War I generals used to move things around on a big round table, like that's the accuracy of the movement that I kind of like. That's the act of moving ships in A Billion Suns, and where they end up is really important. And you know, you'll end up doing a bit of measuring here and measuring there. But yeah, so it's about a different thing. The system was always going to be a simple movement system.
Yeah, it's about building a fun multi-level geometry puzzle rather than a spatial reasoning one, which was sort of the
those worlds go together.
So you mentioned earlier that A Billion Suns is possibly in the same universe as Gaslands, and I know that there are going to be some people out, you know, in the world wondering about, you know, whether Mars actually was a lie. Do you want to sort of suggest where the timeline is? Is that something that you're still leaving slightly unwritten?
No,
pinned down?
So the game is definitely, like, the game opens with a timeline similar to Gaslands, and in fact it is identical in the first couple of sort of diary entries, but then it scoots forward and shoots much further forward, and so we're in sort of, you know, the year 3120, which I'm disappointed because it was supposed to be 3120 because it was coming out this year, and now I'm annoyed that it's not 21, but whatever. So the background is really a shooting forward of all the same kind of goofy ideas about you know, what if there was a massive expansion, but it was being run by corporations and companies rather than governments and empires. So personally, I find that a more interesting idea, because space empires are lovely, but that stuff feels quite reasonably well explored. And for me, at least, like, my lived reality is one of massive tech giants starting new Cold Wars with China, and that seems more relevant and interesting to me as a writer at the moment. So yeah, so the game is set in a sort of colossally, exponentially expanding human influence over the galaxy, and that's begun with the exploration of like the core systems, which are where the initial kind of mission set, the initial contracts are set, which is the busy industrial hub filled with mining activities and pleasure cruises and all kinds of day-to-day businesses and piracy and so on. And then there are other parts of that of the setting that I want to explore through new contract sets. So exploring a war zone where there's some massive conflicts going on, providing new ways to play the game, exploring the lawless fringe where there's less oversight, but there's also less money, and there's more scrapping around and more crazy adventures to be had. So yeah, so it casts out from the same themes as Gasland, and indeed is sat in the same universe, just a 1,000 years further forward.
Yeah, so I was going to sort of mention about the contract set. So the book is coming out in February as a blue book, and it's going to have a set of contracts. So they're kind of like the scenarios, but in a given game, you select a set number of contracts, and they combine to essentially form a scenario. They're the things that you're being paid to do in that given game.
Yeah, if you've ever played Malifaux, you'll realise I ripped it off.
And so in the main blue book, they're the core contracts. You're going in and you're mining an asteroid field. You're recovering water from a hydro planet. You're rescuing scientists from a space station. The sorts of things you would imagine that a sort of intergalactic mega corporation probably does on its sort of day-to-day runnings. So as I understand it, your intention is to bring out online content, which is going to be expanded contracts in various other areas.
Yeah, definitely going to bring out expanded or new sets of contracts. So with the 12 contracts that are in the book, they form like a nice, coherent, sort of interconnected set of missions. And what I'd like to do is create kind of separate contract sets that maybe have like some slightly different overarching themes, or potentially even some overarching rules. So one idea for the fringe contracts, for example, and it might not work, is perhaps with the fringe contracts, you maybe start with a little money, but you can't go in debt. And so what does that do to the game, and how does that change the flavor? Or with the war zone, like, it's never worked, but I'd love it to be about like taking points off the other player. So you bring things in to destroy things, and it escalates horribly because of that. That was a rule in Billion Suns for a while, but it's really, really tricky to get. And in terms of like how they will get delivered, I mean, I don't know. Might put them in block, might put them out separately. We shall see.
Yeah, there's very much literally a universe to explore in A Billion Suns, which gives you a lot of freedom for writing. That's about all I can think of to mention in this little chat about the difficult second album of Mike Hutchinson.
Yeah. What's fun actually is it's interesting how games like this develop, because there were sort of two things that I wanted, or that inspired the beginning of this game, and one of them was I was playing Star Wars Armada and felt like it was too slow, and as I added more ships, it became too lumbering. And the other thing was I came up with this really nifty way of modeling how small ships would be able to hit big ships really easily but not do very much damage, and big ships would be able to smash 6 bells out of big ships, but it would be really difficult to get a bead on the little one. And you'll see this sort of strange little dice resolution system in the finished game. And it's funny how both of those things kind of either disappeared or just became way less interesting or important as the game evolved itself and as things presented themselves and new ideas emerged. And I think probably much more than Gaslands, or actually I think probably any game that I've put together, this game sort of told me what it was going to be and really innovated during the design and development phase. So that the thing that I set out to make, I kind of didn't make, and something that I did make, which was I couldn't really have imagined at the beginning of the process. So that was a thoroughly enjoyable journey, which I hope to go on again with another game.
A Billion Suns has evolved more than been beaten into shape. I think that I think with Gaslands to a degree, there was an early solid framework, and then we ended up thrashing it until it came into the shape it wanted to be. A lot of the time, it's felt with A Billion Suns like there were some seeds that were definitely worth growing, but then they kind of came into their own shape, and it has been moments of going, this bit needs pruning off, but mostly it's been bits of the game going, we're brilliant, and oh wow, yeah, you are actually. I'd best give you a bit more room.
Right. So anyway, Billion Suns is coming out. Osprey Blue Book coming out in February 2021. Super cheap. You can use any miniatures you like, mounted on any size or shape of base. The game doesn't give a hoot. You can play it across multiple tables, and you will, because it's fabulous played that way.
Yes.
So yeah, pick it up. And if you want to find out more, you can go to abillionsons.space. And that's a web address, apparently.
Yes. Okay, I will say thank you very much for the conversation, Mike, and hopefully we'll chat about something else very soon indeed.
All right, see you in the next one of these videos.
Yep. Right. Bye.